I was once a werewolf abandoned by fate, until my father broke the taboo, exchanging his life for my transformation. Now I am not only the first rational werewolf but also the strongest being. But the price is heavy. I must bear the death of my father and face this cruel world alone. Chapter 47. Torn between choices some centuries ago. Becoming a young 20-year-old man, Fenrir had learned the truth the harsh way. He was confident when he was little that he would become a great werewolf. His father had made him think so. But the cruel reality had become more evident as time passed. Living with his father who had no way of fending for himself, life became more and more difficult to bear. Without the backup of the royal family, and by not being around his kind, the werewolf was changing to worse with each passing day. He also no longer had his mother's love and support, as the latter had left them long ago. The night his father returned, announcing to them that they could not move to the royal palace, had enraged his mother completely. As a small child he thought their simple life was happy, the only problem being that he had expected to become a full werewolf. But apparently for his mother it had not been her dream life. She cursed his father in anger, telling him that it was not what he had promised her, not the life that she should have. The meager, insufficient lifestyle had only been the means to convince his father of the difficulties, making him finally take them to the royal palace. But with his father being exiled, any hope she had at that time died. Giving up on his father and him, his mother had left them in the dead of night, the only reminiscence of her presence remaining the clothes and small things she could not take with her. And Fenrir himself. She had abandoned him. This crushed Fenrir and changed his life completely. His father was not capable of taking care of himself, much less of a pup. It made him mature overnight, as he had to give up on all of the things that made him a child. But if there was one thing that he had not let go of throughout the years, even though he knew it would be impossible, it was the hope of becoming a real werewolf, a hope his father no longer held, even in his madness. He called desperately, after one of his outings to the village's market. Yes, replied hoarsely his father, getting up from bed. The former young prince, full of life, looked nothing like his old self, only a shell that resembled his older brother, the king of the werewolves, vaguely remained, although he looked much older than he normally should have. Considering his werewolf nature, I found it. I found a way for us to return to the royal palace, he exclaimed happily, bursting through the door of his father's room. How? The man asked without any expression. He knew his son had kept asking around and had thought of different ways over the years, but he knew there was no way to transform a human into a werewolf. A person who did not have at least the aura capable of changing the color of the rose to any color. They were saying in the village. I heard a group of hunters speaking. They were talking about how some werewolves had bitten some of them, trying to transform them into werewolves, to make the humans stop hunting them. Can't we try that? If I knew it was that easy, we wouldn't have suffered so much. Fenrir hopefully informed. All this time the answer had been so simple. It was just they had been oblivious to it. No, his father denied, standing up from bed and reaching for a bottle of whiskey. It had been the only liquid that entered the unshaved, ruffled man's throat these days. Why? We could go back. Do you not want me to become a werewolf? Do you want me to rot away like you? Fenrir spat spiteful, losing his temper towards the father for whom he had long lost any respect. You cannot. The werewolves who tried that are fools. The thing the hunters were most likely talking about is transforming a human into a lichen. But a lichen is a senseless creature. They listen to no logic. No norms can bind them. The only authority they could recognize would be the master that created them. But even that lichen would have lost his mind. So in the end, they wouldn't listen to anyone. Mad savage creatures, without a shred of human morality, who would want to become something like that. His father raised his voice, disapproving him, for better or worse. He had given up his beautiful mate, his royal family for them, and now even his son dared to talk to him this way, when no other werewolf would have dared to even look him in the eyes. If it was in the past. Not to mention, it is virtually impossible to turn a human into a lichen. There is a high chance you would die. Forget it. You are a human. You will only ever be a human. His father's voice raising even higher, until it had become a shout. His young foolish son could not tell, but he knew. The failure of such an experiment would mean death. This was his son, even though he was only a human. The blood that coursed deep through his veins were his. Nonetheless, not to mention, in the small chance that a werewolf would manage to turn a human into a lichen, the werewolf who would succeed, he or she would meet their end. But I am a hybrid. It would be easier for me to become a lichen considering this. And I could still keep my sane mind because of this fact also. If you will not, I would prefer die, rather than keep living like this. From day to day. You are my father. You are the cause of everything. All of this is your fault. All of it. The angered voice, the spiteful words, the regrets, and the fear of being left alone. All of it played with the werewolf's mind. He tried some more to convince his son of the consequences. He did not want to be the one to kill his own flesh and blood. But in the end, Fenrir really did not give him a choice. The man had not taken into account that he had instilled in his son for such a long time the faith that he would become a werewolf. As such, Fenrir did not want to think or even could of another way to live his life. Seeing the young Fenrir hurt and unconscious, and being afraid of losing the only family he had left, his father broke one of the goddess's taboos. He was not sure it would work, but as a father he hoped his son would keep on living, even if it meant his death. Moments passed, as the father held his bitten son to his chest. He hugged him as tears flooded from his eyes, before a small smile appeared on the werewolf's face. After what felt like a lifetime, Fenrir's pale face began to change to a healthier color. This, coupled with the fact that the werewolf was beginning to sense as though his life was leaving his body, meant that the transformation had been successful. Fenrir opened his eyes, feeling everything more vibrantly than before. Somehow he felt that the change was real. The trick that he had played on his father had worked. He smiled brightly, getting up, feeling the strength and power that was beginning to course through his veins. He exclaimed happily, shaking his father's arm, seeing that the werewolf had kept his seating position near him, but did not react. He would have never thought that as soon as his hand tried to get his father's attention, there would be no reaction. The werewolf's body fell due to Fenrir's touch, as his body slowly turned to dust before scattering in the wind. He had succeeded. He had become the world's first rational lichen, the strongest of all, at the cost of his own father's life. The present time. The sun had set for a couple of hours already, and without it, the frozen atmosphere became even colder and lifeless. There were no humans, no animals, no living beings as far as you could see. The only small presence of life, if you could call it that, were the trees that were burdened by piles of snow, with branches that felt like they would fall any moment now at the smallest of efforts, under their own weight. But still the piles of snow did not fall, as even the wind was no longer blowing, as it had also been frozen in time. This had been the inert state of nature for some time now, and it felt like it would continue to be so for a while longer, but, unexpectedly, even without the lightest of breeze, very slowly small snowflakes started to fall one by one, from the said trees. There were only 2, 3 snowflakes falling at a time from each tree. Then there were 4. The number of snowflakes that fell kept on increasing, until you could no longer count them, as though it had started to snow again. It was truly strange because there was still not even a small breeze blowing to move them and make them fall. One could not do anything but wonder why the snow fell, but you would not have to ponder too long, as the lifeless forest soon came to life, coming closer and closer, with the earth rumbling under their paws. Thousands of werewolves moved as one giant pack, one massive coordinated group following the biggest alpha there was. The midnight black wolf knew of no tiredness, knew of no pain, as it kept howling, stirring them in the direction of where his loved one would be. Following behind him, other alpha-ranked werewolves struggled to maintain his pace. If you would see them in the distance, you would say they were quite slow compared to their king, but normal ranked werewolves would tell you Never in their life would they have seen such a fast and strong army moving steadily through the forest. The werewolves were riled up in anger. They had been informed of who they were rescuing. To dare capture the Luna of all packs, such courage must be ripped to pieces. They would ensure they left none living in the aftermath. The pressure emitted by their bodies, their raging howls through the night, as they ran between the trees, even ripping some of them apart in their will to follow the shortest distance possible, were terrifying. But the scariest of all would still be Sky, being the one in control at the moment. He was the most savage of them all. Celia was suppressing all of her aura, which meant he could not feel even the slightest connection with her. He could not feel wailing at all. She was no different than a human. At this moment, as powerless as one, the severed connection making him feel like he was at the edge of an abyss. At Fenrir's place, the royal family does not have other descendants than Salas. Celia tried to speak. The children had been taught since young that the king's family line, for the longest of time, had consisted of only one male that passed the throne to another male. Well, I am sure that is what every werewolf thinks. Who would know of the skeletons in the royal family's closet? But that's enough from me. I did not invite you all the way here just to talk about me, Fenrir said, then slowly approached Celia again, snapping out of her thoughts. Celia felt uncomfortable at his close distance to her, and moved back again. She felt intimidated at his eyes that seemed to try to analyze her face and thoughts. Did you know, little Alpha, the king's position is hereditary, so in a sense he is not chosen by the goddess. Only the queen is. It makes you wonder if I were to become the king, with you as my queen, well, it wouldn't go against her wishes. Now would it? Tu es agent extraordinaire, Madeline Logan. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. She expressed horrified, at the thought of herself by the side of anyone else other than Solas. Where did this person come from? And why would he be so confident that he could take Solas's place? Not to mention, she would never accept another man, even if she could be killed for refusing. I am just saying, the rigid laws the royal family has imposed for such a long time, with rules of only mating a specific werewolf first at birth, and being a pure-blooded werewolf, they are such outdated thinking. I could be a fresh start, more so than the man already indoctrinated by the strictness. He had dreamed once of being part of the royal family, but he had given up with the death of his father, shifting all of his blame and anger that had accumulated over the years onto them, wandering for a long time, gathering strays from all over the place. He had gained a new purpose, a new reason to be alive, in a world that had rejected his existence for all of his life. If in the current world he lived in, his existence was akin to only an anomaly, then he would transform this world in one in which the normal would be the anomaly, and his existence the logical one. Being with your rightful mate is the only way for a soul to be complete. This is not wrong. And Solos is not only a king because of his lineage, he is one because of his power, the first ranked amongst us. He is the strongest of all the werewolves. He is the one binding us all together. No matter what you are trying to do, stop it. You would never succeed in your purpose, Celia said, trying to maintain her calm, and her slight tremble from being revealed. If he was Solas's cousin, what had poisoned his heart, turning it so black, why wouldn't he want to get along with Solas? Now this is where you are wrong. Even the strongest of men is only as strong as his weakest point, and you are that weak point. You made the king of the werewolves, the weakest of them all, he said, looking intently at her. He could see why the werewolf king would be smitten with her. She was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, but strangely there seemed to be more to her than met the eye, something that drew him to her, like a moth to a flame. In the short time he had been in her presence, he was beginning to feel that if Celia had asked him to give up everything he was trying to do a bit more stronger, his heart would waver in doing her bidding. Why did only Solas have a mate? Why did the goddess had to be so partial to werewolves? He had left him alone all this time, glad that Solas was like him, also an anomaly, one without a mate. But he was not. It only made him hate him more. It only made him want to kill more. If you are thinking of having me as a trading tool, or a weapon against others, I would fight you until I die. Do not think the mate of the king would just let you do as you pleased. She desperately threatened. For some reason she was afraid that Solas would give his life without the smallest of struggle. If this man asked him for it, she could not be his weakness. She did not want to be the cause of his death. I am sure you would struggle, but your struggle would not mean much in your current condition. I do not know exactly what your problem is at this moment, but for someone who defeated dozens of hunters on her own, for one who is an alpha, do not even admit the smallest of oars. Surely there is something that binds you, something that forces you to be only a human at this moment. Or what? Did you think I don't feel your weakness right now? Hearing him speak, she really felt like she was in a deadlock. On one side, under no circumstances, could she release her pressure, as it could mean Crescent's death. On the other side she could be used to bring down her loved one. There were only two choices, but no matter which one she chose, someone would die. My king, Lucian spoke, bursting through the door. He did not need to inform him further. His presence alone, Fenrir knew what it meant. That man was coming to rescue Celia. At the witches' coven, murmured Carissa, setting the potions she had in her hands on the table. She had suddenly felt very nervous. She had a bad feeling all day, but this feeling became more and more acute as night came, until she could not even focus on her research now. What is it? Asked Ebony, raising her head that had been resting on her paws. It is tonight. It has already begun. Looking horrified, she had figured out the reason for her anxiety. Are you certain? The cat asked again, raising on her feet, as she gained an expression similar to Clarissa's. The witch had not told her what would begin, but for her to have that appearance it could only mean one reason. Yes, no doubt about it. The night of prophecy, the night when everything would begin anew or everything will fall, is tonight. Clarissa said, trembling. They had not made it in time. How much of the stone would have turned blue by now? Would there be enough time? Ebony desperately voiced. Without her powers, what could Celia do? I do not know if even a quarter of the ring has changed by now. I thought we would have a bit more time. I thought we could get Crescent out before it would be too late. What set things in motion earlier than they should have? Couldn't we do something about it? Couldn't we help? Resigned. Clarissa shook her head. There was nothing they could do once the wheels of fate had begun moving. They had already done their part. The will of the goddess had only been for Clarissa to inform Celia's sister of her fate, assuring the latter would interfere and Celia would not be forced to be with a wrong mate, to assure that she would come to the academy and meet the rightful one, and for Clarissa to find a way to help the wolf that had been innocently mixed up in Celia's fate, to help Crescent. That was why she had told Diane all those years ago that Brianna had a lunar fate. For 100 years Celia's birth had been delayed to right the things that were going worse with each passing day. 100 years Celia's wolf had been prepared, had been reshaped, had been strengthened. 100 years to prepare for the most powerful queen the werewolves could have. But as waning and Celia had already shown in the past, for this queen to be so perfect she would also have one quality that could be used as a weapon against herself. They would always put everyone's well-being above their own. They would always sacrifice for their loved ones, even their very life. But for a ruler chosen by the goddess to do so, what would it mean for the werewolf race? For the ones who would not be able to ensure her survival? Chapter 48. A foolish man, an innocent wolf. The lightness of the full moon shone brightly upon the frozen earth, as the ever-present white snow glistened and sparkled, making the darkness of night not that much different from the whiteness of day. The small diamonds of snow seemed to glitter all around, like small lights of a theatre stage. A stage prepared for the most important battle in the werewolves' history, as though the moon goddess herself had wanted to witness this night, and prepared the battlefield beforehand. But, unfortunately, the light of the moon soon enough would have to be enough to light the battlefield for the only spectator of this gruesome play. As the white silvery snow, was slowly beginning to be dyed in a bright crimson color. The thousands of werewolves had not ran much longer, before seeing in the distance what seemed to be a fortress-like castle, when their attention was redirected from the objective ahead, towards the obstacles in front. Thousands of werewolves were ordered to participate. Members of council, royal guards, teachers at the academy, and pretty much all ranked werewolves males that could have gathered within the hour, howled and growled at the sight of their enemies, ready to attack as the order was given. Enemies they would have never thought existed. Savage, mindless creatures that should never be allowed to see the light of day, roamed in front of them, beings that would have been brought to life by their ancestors' sins. Beasts created by breaking the third taboo. Lycans. Lycans could never transform into full wolves. Their body at most resembled a failed attempt at creating one, because of their head, which indeed looked like a wolf's, but they still walked and looked like humans from below their necks to their feet, with the only difference being their body that was covered in ruffled fur, and their spine elongating itself in a tail. But normal werewolves, in wolf form, would not be that much different from a real wolf, if you did not take into account their size. The werewolves were horrified at such a sight. A lycan had only ever once successfully been created, but by realizing the abomination, the werewolves that discovered the atrocious being terminated its life. They were extinct, a black spot in werewolves' history, but here they were numbering thousands. This sight would have normally caught them off guard, but in the presence of the king, lycans did not matter. What they meant made no difference. As long as he could get to his mate, he was capable of even passing through fire. Much less creatures. A loud commanding howl escaped his snout, as he directed his head towards the moon, reaching the ears of the werewolves, and restoring the general order. It was as though he was informing the goddess of the start of their play, their war. It was also an order to freely attack, charge forward with everything they got, as all the werewolves moved with their heavy paws smashing the ground, pushing themselves forward. They followed closely behind the members of the council, who were steadily running in the shadow of Solas, creating an arrow-like formation, piercing through the middle of the thousands of lycans. Arriving in front of them, Sky took the first blood as he ripped through Schrader lycan, that did not manage to react, much less attack. Near the lycans it could be seen clearly. Solas was at least 2 times larger than even the biggest of lycans. Not that it was that important. He was not interested in fighting as many as he could. His purpose was not to fight them, but to pass through them, so fighting in a coordinated attack, Sky and Solas, interchained quickly and strategically between each other. The human side swiftly going through them partially transformed, clawing only when he had no other choice as the lycans gathered even more towards him. When the lycans multiplied, giving him no other way out, Sky would take control, transforming completely, jamming through their numbers. Before Solas took control again, Sky had force, while Solas speed. They were a fearsome combination that decimated tens of lycans, even though they did not try particularly to do so, as they only fought the lycans in their path. Closely behind, covering his back and assuring they would not be circled around, the council members, experienced tacticians, warriors of many fights, coordinated the others, as all-around fights broke out. Clashes of fangs, claws, fierce howls dominated the battlefield. You could not see other results for the ending of this battle, as the thought in everyone's mind, werewolves and lycans alike, was only one: death. Standing in a huge conference-like room, Celia's face was littered with tears, near the throne of Fenrir, as they watched the clashing through a giant mirror on the opposite wall, courtesy of a small witch's spell, a witch that had previously casted spells on the students in the forest. Does it bother you that your fellow werewolves are fighting, that they are dying? Fenrir impassively asked, with a hand sustaining his head. He looked on ahead as though he was only a spectator, not a participant of this battle. He did not look happy seeing the deaths, but was also not upset, feeling disconnected from the situation entirely. Please, stop. Why would you do this? All of them have souls. All of them have hearts. Why would you direct them towards their death? Celia's voice hoarsely cried, her voice reverberating in the hollow room. Enthusiasm, in the past, she had hurt and killed hunters herself, to protect her life and the life of others. But the Lycans now, in a sense, were innocent. Even though they were killing the werewolves, the Lycans that were fighting were kidnapped humans forcefully transformed into creatures. They did not choose to act like how they were, as opposed to the hunters who had their own rationality and could decide for themselves. Or perhaps it was the fact that the king's Luna was the one who would inhibit his ferocity, and by recognizing Solas as her mate, it had also changed her like this. She did not know which of these was the exact reason, or perhaps both were, but she knew for certain. It was wrong for this war to continue. Fenrir did not reply, still looking expressionless, but a small frown appeared between his eyebrows. All had lived, she said. Was she talking about Lycans and werewolves alike? It shook his heart, as werewolves only ever considered Lycans abominations, creatures that could only be dealt with by killing them, but she was shedding tears for all. A ruler, most likely sent by the goddess, shed tears for Lycans, although the latter had rejected their existence. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilbert, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. It seemed that the goddess had made an error in her design, an error he very much welcomed. The Lycans do not matter. They are only mindless creatures, and werewolves are not my concern, he stated to confirm his thoughts. It does not matter which of them are dying. They all are important. Even Lycans were innocent before they were transformed. They do not deserve this. Having less and less control of her emotions. Perhaps it was the mother in her, the Lune, her speaking, but she felt upset for the losses. You could put an end to this if you would be my queen. You know, Fenrir said, looking with narrowed eyes towards her. Finally reaching the rear of the enemy line, Sola's mind linked Gabriel and the council. I am going on ahead. I can faintly smell her. I will go retrieve my queen. It was a very faint smell. It was barely there, but he knew she was in the fortress, so no matter what he would go to her as fast as he could. Wait, let us go with you. Gabriel mind linked back. They were having a hard time. The Lycans were strong indeed. They had defeated quite a few already, but the same could be said by the opposite side as well. No, there are too many. Coordinate the others. I will be fine by myself, Solos said, and closed the connection, giving Gabriel and the others no chance to refuse or try to reason. In his path, he had still encountered Lycans and rogues alike. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilgan, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. The majority were outside the fortress fighting. It seemed that inside as well some still remained, in case of the fortress being breached. But as before, he also disregarded their presence, fighting them only to go further to where he felt the scent getting stronger. He only briefly stopped. When in a hallway on the floor he found a jacket, distracting him a bit. A distraction that immediately was taken advantage of. Well, it seems our discussion will have to wait a little more. An uninvited guest has come for a visit, Fenrir stated, no longer conversing with Seymour. He knew that Solas would reach here. He had expected as such. Unfortunately, the new wolfsbane weapons they made were difficult to create, and it had also gotten harder to procure the plants since they had used the bullets in the previous attacks. Up until they kidnapped Celia. Not to mention, the process itself was a long one. If he could have had armed his Lycans, the war would have ended much easier and faster. Fortunately, at least inside the fortress, the guards were armed with them, and they proved themselves quite useful. The door burst open, having been hit with a Lycan's body, with Solas entering quickly after. A truly stupid man, Fenrir thought, to come quicker for his mate. He had even disregarded his safety and his caution. Exactly as he said before, she really was his weakness. Fearing for her life, He had recklessly come and had gotten himself injured before even reaching her. His abdomen and arms were shallowly clawed. Normally, it should have already healed. But to defeat that many guards, a few bullets-filled wolfsbane still slightly grazed his skin. None hit him directly as he was too fast, but just the little substance with which the bullets were coated was enough to impair with his ability to regenerate for a little while. But still he was full of vigor. Seeing her uninjured face, he finally felt like he could breathe. A happiness Celia could not share, seeing him in his current state. "Don't come," she yelled at his approach. But her warning came too late. He was like a moth to a flame. Even if she would burn him, he would still approach. "Don't," Celia said, but could not continue as her former teacher, who was standing a little closer to her, swiftly grabbed her neck, keeping her in place. Solas's eyes darkened again at the sight. He wanted to rip him apart, but a wrong move and that man would have snapped her neck in two. So this is the famous werewolf king. Honestly, I thought the man of which legends were written about was more rational than this. "Oh well, it is good for me," Fenrir said, with his hand still holding his head, seemingly bored. His plans had been moved forward by Celia's appearance, but in fact her appearance made all the difference in him winning this battle, in him becoming the king. He had made a gamble in anger caused by Solas having a mate, but as long as he won, it was perfect. "Release my mate, or suffer the consequences," Solas said, angered, with his canines and claws already eliminating in anger, as the room was beginning to be engulfed in his alpha aura. "What consequences? That is a good joke. You are not in a position to show anger, or demand anything for that matter," Fenrir said, smiling, a cold smile that did not reach his eyes. "Don't. I always wanted to see who would be stronger, me or the king." Fenrir held his right hand. Cain, as the latter was going to go towards Solas, rising from his throne, he removed the black shirt he had on, and with a loud roar transformed himself in his lichen form. He was the biggest lichen there was. Solas could clearly see that he was in fact the initial lichen, the one who had transformed all the others that were fighting outside. But in front of his eyes Fenrir was still non-existent. All he could see was the petite woman that was looking scared towards him, but could not say anything, having her neck obstructed. The man behind her was only releasing his grip a little bit, just enough for her to breathe, but not to talk. He said, looking at her, to reassure her worries. Only then did he finally look towards Fenrir, as the latter had come towards him slowly, before disappearing. Anyone who saw the lichen would say he vanished, but Solas's keen eyes saw that Fenrir had moved fast to his side, trying to catch him unprepared. He thought that Solas would still act reckless and distracted like before, but Fenrir did not realize that with Celia in his eyes, he was undefeatable. Solas avoided Fenrir with the same speed, and quickly punched Fenrir's abdomen. He had wanted to punch him again, but his hand was caught by Fenrir's big furry one, as the latter tried to throw him in the wall. Solas steadied his feet, and did not hit the wall as Fenrir intended, having already transformed into sky, and like how he had done before, started to coordinate with him, interchanging between man and wolf. They struck with claws, bites, as each clash between them reverberated in the room, making small currents of air appear, making it seem like there were vibration everywhere. The force of both their hits akin to small earthquakes. They fought with all they got, and they seemed almost evenly matched at first. "To my agent extraordinaire, Mylen Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." You could not really judge their strength fair, as Solas had already been running for his life to get to Celia, and had fought his way inside for the same reason. Not to mention, the wolfsbane was impeding his regeneration. Still, with all the disadvantages, the difference in power slowly showed itself, and bit by bit, despite his injuries, Solas was overpowering the lichen, angered that even in his current state, the werewolf still managed to hold his position against him. Fenrir roared even angrier, stepping back, unsatisfied of what could be a defeat, transforming himself into a human again. The lichen had regained his natural ebony-colored hair and blue eyes. Right now he very much resembled Saulus like this. He had hated seeing his father's face in the mirror, the face of the man he sacrificed. So he usually masked his real hair color and eyes with a spell that broke with him transforming into a lichen. Fenrir was once again about to charge towards Saulus in his human form, where a gunshot was heard. "What are you doing?" Fenrir roared, looking towards Lucian, as the rogue appeared in front of the door and shot Saulus from behind. "My king." Lucian wanted to explain himself. He only then realized that Fenrir was angry. He had wanted to fight Saulus fair, but now with another wolfsbane bullet added in his stomach, there was no such chance. Seeing her beloved hurt, even though he did not waver and stood firmly on his feet, Celia's heart felt like it was breaking into millions of pieces. Everything was beginning to weigh on her more and more, as she felt powerless to help him. All the werewolves that were fighting outside, there was too much bloodshed, too much pain to bear. She tried to voice, but could not with her constricted throat, making her feel even more helpless. Fenrir did not let Lucian speak more, gesturing with his hand for the latter to stop. "It seems that I cannot check further which one of us is stronger, though I will recognize that before that shot, you were superior." Sighing, it would be petty of him to make himself appear like he was the one who had the upper hand, when he did not. "To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience and enthusiasm." The victory of the entire battle was his nonetheless. Saulus still did not care for what Fenrir was saying, having only her face in his eyes. His feet were already once again new in her direction, but he only made one step and Riddick had constricted her throat more. It was a threat. Each step he would take would mean she would be closer to dying. "My man will kill her. If you move closer, I suggest you stop." Now that it came to this, I think we should end all of it. Don't you? Let's avoid a lot more werewolves dying. "To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." "Stand still and let yourself be killed, or she will be the one to die," Fenrir said, looking towards Saulus's already weak body. Hearing him, Celia was trying to unravel the huge man's hand from around her neck, to reach Saulus, but it would not budge. Looking towards him, she trembling tried to reach with her arms, as she gave up her attempt to unclench the man's arm. He was looking up to her smiling, the mechanical man who never smiled at anyone. The man who was rumored to have a stone heart was smiling softly at her reassuringly. No pain could be sensed from his face, but she knew that he was barely hanging to his consciousness. How could he not, when his battered body filled with bullets of wolfsbane was now clawed by lichens? At Fenrir's order, several lichens that had arrived with Lucian were already near him. They were quickly leaving big slashes all across his body, but they were shallow, as shallow as they could be to ensure his death would be slow. Fenrir was trying to make his death a painful one as possible. It would be a death littered with sufferings, up till he closed his eyes for the very last time. "Stop it. I beg of you, stop it," she cried hoarsely as she forced herself trying to again unclench the arm around her throat, but there was no reaction from anyone. No one listened to her words. "Stop it. Please kill me instead," she said with a voice filled with suffering, looking at the foolish man who was still smiling at her. To not frighten her. How could Saulus smile, she thought, when she could feel his hurting until she did not know how he could keep his sanity. They had not marked each other yet. She was also suppressing her power, but their bond kept getting stronger, until she could feel all his emotions and pain like it was her own. She knew how could he do it. He knew what reacting to their attacks meant. It would mean her demise. If Fenrir could not have her as a queen, then he would prefer her death instead. Just as she felt torn to pieces, seeing her beloved ripped apart, just as she felt like she was the one who was suffering, with rolling tears flowing from her chocolate eyes, Crescent spoke to her slowly. "To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble, Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Use your real power. She flinched when she heard the familiar voice. How could Crescent wake up? She was supposed to still be dormant, but her fluctuating emotions, waning suffering, had loosened the constriction she was placed in. Crescent, through sheer resilience, had drifted in and out of consciousness the entire time, and although she did not know what the exact situation was, when Clarissa had explained what would happen to her, she had heard them also. She knew why Celia was suppressing her power. I cannot. The ring has not finished your transfer. Stopping it now would mean your death. Celia immediately denied. This was her sister. She had been with Celia since birth. She and Waning had already robbed Crescent's future by absorbing her sister. How could she hurt her once more? Why do you? And Waning as well, the wolf said, upset, almost raging. Why do you both feel that I should be the one guarded and protected? That you must sacrifice all for me, when I would do the same for you as well? Crescent screamed. Don't, Crescent, Celia said, crying. She did not know who to choose at this very moment. How could she choose between the foolish man who had loved her and protected her with every fibre of his being, and Crescent, the one of the only true sister she had in this life, the one who had accompanied her through all her sorrows? If you cannot make the choice, to my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I will make it for you, Crescent said, slowly going towards a barely formed portal. It appeared like a transparent water in the wolf's chamber, but it still seemed patched up. It was not whole. She looked towards it, and without hesitating longer, forcefully transferred herself through the portal that had barely formed. She knew clearly what it meant. Clarissa had explained it to them the first time Celia wore the ring. 1. She must never take it off. 2. Crescent cannot pass through the portal until it is formed completely. They would know of this when the ring changed from blue to red. But now it was only a quarter to a third blue. It would mean that Crescent would most likely die. Celia raged in sorrow. Why would it all end like this? Why did she have to make choices? Why everything in her life must be sacrificed? Feeling Celia at her lowest point, and without the presence of Crescent, Waning realized she was once again the only one in the wolf's chamber. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I know you are upset. I am too. But we must stop everything. It's now or never. Come in our chamber. Waning shouted in her mind, imagining herself for the second time in the chamber. As in the outside world it appeared as she was only standing still, like a doll without a soul. Celia quickly ran towards Waning. She had thought the latter would shift places with her like in the past. But Waning did not. Standing on her forelegs, the majestic wolf lowered her head, placing her forehead to Celia's forehead. Celia, we never tapped in our true power before. We never released it as we should have. Let me show you what we are truly capable of. Chapter 49. A ruler chosen by the goddess, fighting with everything they got. The werewolves were struggling against the lichens, as the latter fought with total disregard for their safety. The order to fight was absolute. It had priority in front of even their well-being. As such, in death they still managed to take a werewolf with them, or at least gravely injure one. The werewolves were also tired from traveling for such a long distance, making their situation even more dire, but still under the coordination of Gabriel and the members of the council. They kept their ground against the lichens. They could only hope they could hold on, to ensure it would be enough time for Solas to return with their queen. Inside the fortress, even in his pain, Solas was still hanging on, looking towards his beautiful mate. He was truly worried, as Celia had stopped crying and struggling, which would have been a good thing, if at the same time she did not look like nothing but a puppet. He was afraid. The trauma of seeing him die before her eyes was mortifying, and would let her be scarred for life. He wanted to do something about it. He wanted to run towards her and assure her that everything would be all right, but he could not. These were the last thoughts he had before falling to the ground unconscious. Riddick, loosen your grip on her neck. You are hurting her too much. Fenrir said displeased. He knew the rogue was as bloodthirsty as ever. He had tried to keep his cruelness under control, but Riddick still exaggerated many times. Still, if it was anybody else he would not care. But towards her he felt a closeness and a desire to protect. The threat that he would kill her Xola's fought back was only for the werewolf to give up fighting. He did not want to truly do that, and Riddick should have known it. But he was overstepping his position. He was getting out of line. My king, if I loosen my grip, she would try to escape again. Riddick replied dissatisfied. He could see clearly that Sia was not reacting in any way, but for some unknown reason this only unsettled him more. It was like the calm before the storm. Not to mention, he did not know what exactly stopped Celia's alpha aura, making her unable to use her werewolf powers. But she was the alpha of the Watchers. He had seen her practice and knew just how powerful she could possibly be. He did not want to take a chance. At the coven, do you see anything? Ebony asked, frightened, as the small witch was looking down in her cauldron. Clarissa had filled it with water and enchanted it, making the surface of the clear water inside the cauldron into a mirror to check on the situation. They could do nothing, but they were still worried. Yes, I think waning is breaking the seal, Clarissa said, gulping. But Crescent, Ebony asked, concerned. If waning dared to do that, then what would happen to the smaller wolf? I do not know. Perhaps the mental strain was too much. Waning may have slipped and lost her control of her aura. Or Crescent woke up because of their emotions, she said, looking down. Celia looked like a statue. It would appear that she had given up, but it did not seem so. She is shifting, Clarissa continued, as she started to see some changes to Celia. After a few more seconds, Ebony asked, jumping on the table and also looking down inside the cauldron. But that there is no wolf, Ebony exclaimed. Yes, it is not, Clarissa said, finally realizing what the goddess had tried to do, finally put all the pieces of the puzzles together. That is a true ruler chosen by the goddess, she said, smirking, finally calming a bit her emotions. At Fenrir's place, Riddick. I will not repeat myself, Fenrir said, raising his voice. But the Watcher's former teacher did not manage to react to his order. From the powerless woman, that felt nothing like a werewolf until this moment, a massive pressure could be sensed, as he felt his grip loosening out of fear. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. It was a feeling he had not felt since he was a pup. It made him wonder if it truly was this particular feeling. Because of the strangeness of the matter, why would he feel fear from a woman who seconds ago was having trouble of even opening his hand a little, just to free her neck? But it would not take long for Riddick to understand that this was truly fear he was feeling. Swiftly turning around, she shoved his hand away with her right hand, before grabbing his neck with the other, and raising him a bit in the air. The startle of the reverse situation was diminished, in comparison to what his eyes were trying to register happening before them. Before his very eyes and Fenrir's, Celia's hair whitened from the roots until her ends, becoming a color similar to her wolf's fur. But her hair changing color was nothing, compared to the fact that her face was also swiftly transforming. Normally, when partially transforming, a werewolf would only change the color of his eyes, the length of his canines, and his nails, which would reshape themselves into claws. But she was not partially transforming, although not transforming into a wolf as well, with her eyes changing their normal warm chocolate color to a golden hue, with her tender normal skin covered by a thin layer of soft white fur around the edges of her face, with her normal small ears reshaping themselves into wolf ears, not to mention her canines protruding from her mouth, and her fur-covered hands. She resembled more alike than a werewolf, although her face still retained her human-like appearance. What are you? Riddick tried to ask, as he had never seen such a being before. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks to your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. With her hand still firmly keeping his neck in place, moved her head from side to side as if unaccustomed to her body, while also trying to relax her neck, which was already quickly healing from the previous hold. Finishing cracking her neck, she looked into his eyes, making him tremble. It felt as though she could see into his very soul. He felt like he was staring at a being that should never be slightly offended. Opening her mouth, with a face even more expressionless than she ever had before, she slowly spoke to her former teacher. "You are not worth keeping." The voice solemnly spoke, but it was not Celia's voice. It felt like there were two people speaking at the same time. Waning and Celia had fused with each other. They were neither wolf nor human, neither lycan nor werewolf. The two personalities were at this moment one and the same. "I can smell too much blood from you. Too corrupted." Before slamming his body into the wall, from where it lifelessly fell as soon as she retracted her hand, seeing his brother dead, came clear to his mind of the haziness her power had induced, and swiftly came roaring towards her. But he did not know what struck him, as he also lifelessly fell, with his neck snapped. At this point, Fenrir was frozen in place. She had surprised him from the very moment he saw her, but nothing compared to how she had now. He felt speechless to even outscore her act in any way. Even when she quickly passed him, he had no reaction whatsoever. The only thing he did, or better said felt compelled to do, was follow her movements with his eyes. All the people in the room felt frozen much like him, as her aura was leaking everywhere. Even the lycans that had clawed Solas and were standing near him had refrained from hurting the unconscious man any longer. Lucian was only able to react when he saw her in front of him and tried to shoot. But there was no time to put his thoughts into actions. With inhuman speed, Celia had arrived in front of the door, and angered beyond measure, gripped the weapon that was still in Lucian's arms, the weapon that he had used to hurt her beloved, and deformed it, making it no longer usable, before the latter was able to fire even one single bullet. "You as well. Too much blood," her echoing voice spoke, and as the man still tried to regain his composure and attempted to hit her, she quickly disappeared from his eyes. Before appearing behind him, he did not see her face for a second time. Even as he thought to turn around, he only felt the shock of hitting the cold hard wall, as she had brutally slammed his body with her foot in the opposite wall, assuring that no weapons could be used against Solas. Only then did she quickly come to his side, where the lycans were surrounding him. Fenrir had expected the lycans to attack her, even though he did not order them to. Just for the fact that they would mindlessly attack anyone that came near them, he could already envision them hurting her, and he was about to command them not to. But he did not utter one word, as they not only did not touch even a strand of her hair, they also strangely moved aside, allowing her access to Solas. "What are you doing?" "Kill him," Fenrir angrily said. But he was in for another shock when the lycans stood in place, not reacting in any way. It was like they were still awaiting orders. Why would the lycans docilely move and not continue killing Solas, as he commanded them to? And whose order would they listen to, if not his? Kneeling beside him, she felt his breath was shallow. With just that much wolfbane in his blood, he would not be in immediate danger. But with the wounds all over his body which were still dripping blood, surely he was steadily becoming weaker. Her heart felt like it was pricked by thousands of needles, as she gently took his head into her arms, afraid of hurting him even more. Her golden eyes narrowing, with warm tears once again falling from her eyes, she gently placed a kiss on his forehead. This man had saved her from death. This person had shielded her from the outside world and her family, had loved her without asking anything in return. He had even been willing to give his life for her without a second thought. "I am sorry, my love. Normally, only a male would mark his mate, but you see, I am not a normal mate," Celia whispered slowly, removing her lips from his forehead, but still keeping her face close to his. Giving him another loving gaze, she slowly raised his neck a bit, exposing his fair skin. and sank her fangs into the crook of where the shoulder meets the neck. From ancient times, only a male would mark his mate, making them both grow stronger from the bite, strengthening their bond, and completing their pairing. But in this situation her mark would solidify their connection, while also help his regeneration restart itself. Seeing the situation before him, only then did Fenrir furiously move, angrily coming closer to them. He wanted to rip Solas from her arms. If the lichens would not answer to his orders for some strange reasons, then he would do it himself. At least, that was what he intended, but did not expect that those very same lichens would immediately turn to him, moving a step in his direction, as they wanted to block his path. Bewildered by the killing intent he could feel from them, he stopped confused. He was their master. He had created them. They would listen even if he would tell them to take their own lives. But those very same lichens felt like enemies at this moment. Celia calmly removed her fangs from Solas's neck, with Solas's cutter gradually returning to his face, as his wounds immediately started to close. Not a moment later, he also opened his eyes. He had not witnessed the transformation of the being before him, but instinctively knew that it was Celia. Feeling the power emanating from her body, he felt glad and sad at the same time. Could her sorrow had possibly destabilized Waning's control, and they had run amok? I am sorry, but did not specify for what. Still he knew. He could see it in her eyes. She was sorry she had marked him without his permission, although he did not know it was possible for a woman to do it, and also felt regretful for placing him in harm. It seemed that this woman still did not realize just how much he was willing to do for her. If he had to do it all over again, he would gladly die. Seeing how you marked me as yours, he slowly said, causing her eyes to flinch because of worry. Was he upset? Then you will have to take responsibility for me, he continued, with the corner of his mouth raising up in a smile, relaxing her worries, touched that even now he was still thinking of her. She found his shamelessness quite cute. Seeing the happiness of the couple in front of him, Fenrir let out a huge roar, as he once again shifted into his lichen form. He wanted to kill Solas as soon as possible, the last member of the royal family, the last person of the family that caused his existence in this world, and then denied it. He was a person who was never supposed to exist, but he was here nonetheless. Why should that person still carry on with a mate? Why should Solas keep on living, reminding him of the father he lost, the only person who truly loved him, and also the one who had never felt he was enough just as he was, a hybrid. In his lichen form, he easily tossed aside the lichens that had tried to stand before Celia and Solas. He wanted once and for all to kill Solas, or if not, at least die by Celia's hand. Either way it was far better than continuing being in the situation he had been for all of this time. Fenrir took 2 steps in their direction, his massive legs sending vibration to the floor as he moved, and was about to raise his claw hand, expecting Celia to end his life, just as she did with the others. Kneel. Her voice authoritatively spoke. It was a single word, a word that should have meant nothing to him, but this small 5 word caused him to crash to the ground, and really kneel in front of her, without him wishing to. Transform into a human, she demanded with her echoing voice. Words he once again unwillingly obeyed. Why did I listen to her words? His face seemed to say what his mouth could not manage to utter. You would. How could you not listen to your ruler? Celia and Waning replied in unison, understanding his unsaid words. There had never existed a ruler for the lichens, as they never were supposed to exist. He was wordless, his mind not capable of fathom what she had tried to tell him. The goddess did not recognize the lichens, but this woman before him, a ruler meant for werewolves, was saying she was his ruler as well. Her words could not be true, could they? But the lichens that formerly listened to him, protected her. He was also inclined to protect her, since the moment he had seen her. And just now, he did what she said. He obeyed her words. How? You are the ruler as of the werewolves. He tried to speak again, Whoever said that a ruler can only lead one race? Waning, and Celia spoke again, with the same solemn face. She was not joking, nor mocking him. She was sincerely informing him of the current reality. Why did you not kill me yet? Fenrir asked again, not inquiring her once more how it was possible for her to be the Lycan's ruler. The proof was his body that still did not respond to his commands. It was evidence that she had the ability to command the Lycans. A rule imposed by the goddess does not necessarily know the Lycans. I cannot understand them. You will help me in this, Celia said firmly. She had seen no future for the rogues beside him, but through his eyes she saw the possibility to change. And she also did not see herself capable of killing someone who resembled so much her beloved. Why would I? Fenrir asked, still trying to move. But try as he may, he did not raise even an inch his knees from the ground. You are under the impression that I am asking. I am not. I am commanding. Outside the fortress, the werewolves were struggling more and more to keep the Lycans in check. They could not advance forward even a bit. Gabriel had initially thought that he and the council could go with Solas. But if they went, then the rest of the werewolves would have fallen by now. Damn, he muttered continuously inside his mind, as he avoided a Lycan and threw him away. If they could reason with the beings, it would be much easier. But unfortunately they could not. It was a pity, as initially these were normal, innocent people before all this. Quickly, still cursing in his mind, upset they had hurriedly come and did not manage to gather even more stronger werewolves. He went to help another werewolf that was overpowered. Solos had been gone for some time now. Could he have encountered too many problems? He had tried to also mind link him, but the latter did not respond. Could they survive this night? As another to 3 Lycans cornered him, shortly after he had helped the other werewolf, he muttered under his breath some curses, as the Lycans were preparing to jump towards him, with their huge claws exposed. On the wall of the fortress in the moonlight, a single woman stood, her white silver hair reflecting and blending with the rays of the moon. A small twinkle sparkles could be seen between the strands that fluttered in the wind. She was an ethereal beauty, even in her transformed state, resembling more a mirage than a real person. She was truly beautiful, but the frenzy under, the werewolves and Lycans below, had not time to look towards the walls, as they were concentrated on their fights, upset at the bloodshed and the deaths that had already occurred. Celia's voice rumbled in the night. In one powerful roar, startled by the high-pitched sound, all of them finally looked up. The werewolves were surprised by the woman's appearance, and felt her pressure, and were even inclined to submit themselves. But they did not, as she resembled more a Lycan rather than a werewolf. Seeing that all the Lycans had also stopped fighting, they suspected her origin. Was she their master? Was she trying to issue to them new orders? The members of the council and Gabriel thought, immediately mind linking the werewolves to be wary of the new presence. As she had stopped drawing, Celia looked towards the Lycans, satisfied at their obedience. This was the third reason for which she could not kill Fenrir. They were too many and innocent. She could not kill people that had no fault in their actions. Kneel, she said once again with a much more powerful voice, her voice echoing towards all the parts of the battlefield. She was demanding obedience from the Lycans. To discuss rationally with them was impossible in just a second. To make them stop and see if they could reason, she must subdue first, then ask questions later. Under the dumbfounded eyes of the werewolves, all the Lycans listened without exceptions. This master was unusual. Why would she command them to kneel, exposing them weakly in front of the werewolves, offering them a chance to easily kill them, a chance some of them were already eyeing? But the werewolves took no action yet, afraid of the individual capable of holding under her command thousands of Lycans, checking her every actions. The council members were already thinking of attacking. If they could control the master, then the Lycans would have no choice but to listen. This was their intention, an intention that disappeared when the woman transformed herself, accompanied by countless of cracking sounds of bones. Her small hands changed in massive paws, as she had already kneeled to accommodate the new form. Her jaws opened and extended, forming a large snout. Her tender white skin, previously partially covered by fur, was now entirely engulfed by it. Celia yelled in pain, transforming for the second time in her life in Waning's wolf form. Perhaps because it had been so long, but the shifting left her breathless. Finally transformed, she loudly howled, demanding obedience once again. But this time, instead of the lichens, the werewolves immediately kneeled, all of them instantly collapsing on the ground, showing their neck in submission. A war no one would have expected to end in nothing but bloodshed, a battle the end of which one side would surely die, was stopped by the short appearance of one single woman, the ruler of the lichens, and the queen of the werewolves.